Good evening. Welcome to Southern California Edison's Wildfire Safety Community Livestream meeting for the communities of Simi Valley and Moorpark. My name is Rudy Gonzalez, and I'm a Government Relations Manager for Southern California Edison. We greatly appreciate that you took the time to participate this evening, as well as submitting your questions when you registered for the meeting. I would also like to thank representatives from the city of Simi Valley and Moorpark, as well as our state and federal elected officials and their staff for joining us tonight. We appreciate that you always have open lines of communication, and we look forward to our ongoing partnership. Let me start by saying that we recognize how important it is for you and your families to have electricity, especially during a pandemic when many of you are working and learning from home. Our company is focused on safely providing reliable service to our customers and communities. Our number one priority remains public safety. As California prepares for the upcoming wildfire season, we want to provide you with the latest information on how we're preparing and what you can do to be prepared. During the most recent wildfire season, we implemented public safety power shutoffs, or PSPS, to reduce the threat of wildfires. We know many of you experienced multiple PSPS events. We know that these outages are painful and heard your concerns. We are committed to reducing the need of PSPS outages, and I will be sharing more information during our presentation. Please know if you get disconnected or drop off early, this meeting is being recorded and it will be posted to our website at www.sce.com/wildfire. As always, your feedback is extremely important to us, and we encourage you to submit questions. Because we have a large number of attendees, we will be taking questions through the Q&A window. You should be able to see the window on your right-hand side. If there's a similar question already being asked that you would like answered, you can click on the heart icon next to the question to like it. We will address the questions that receive the most likes first, and we'll go down from there. We ask that you please ask questions that are relevant to the topic and the material being presented. We will do our very best to answer as many questions as possible in the allotted time. Here are tonight's presenters. We have Eric Takayisu, Vice President of PSPS Readiness, who will share our wildfire mitigation and PSPS action plans. Terry Ohanian, Director of Expedited Grid Hardening, who will share our efforts to reduce the need for PSPS. David Kientz, Senior Manager with Customer Service, who will share information on our customer care and community engagement efforts. Here are the topics that we will cover as part of our presentation. We hope that the information presented will address many of your questions. Following our presentation, we will then open it up for Q&A to answer questions submitted in the Q&A window. I will now hand it over to Eric to talk about our wildfire mitigation and PSPS action plans.
Thank you, Rudy, and good evening, everyone. First, I want to express my sincere appreciation for your participation and engagement and joining us today. We have a lot of information to cover with you, and we look forward to your questions. So our conversation today is about wildfire safety overall, and we'll include improvements we are making to our public safety power shutoff program. 2020 was a year of unimaginable tragedy for many Californians. Across the state, 2020 was the worst year on record, with nearly 10,000 fires that burned over 4.2 million acres and consumed about 4% of all land in California. And here in Southern California, from summer to the end of the year, we had experienced record dry fuel levels from heat waves and lack of precipitation, and there were 70% more red flag days in 2020 versus 2019. Rainfall totals in Central and Southern California were 50 to 75% below average. And as you can see from here on this chart, 5 of the 6 largest wildfires in California all happened in 2020, which is a sobering statistic and highlights the need for all of us to stay focused on our efforts to reduce the risks and mitigate the impacts. Next slide, please. And towards the end of the year, we had more Santa Ana wind events, ultimately impacting 138,000 of our customers, adding to the challenges with the COVID-19 pandemic that has affected all of us. We understand the difficulties that being without power has, especially for our vulnerable customers, people working from home, and children going to school online. And with the weather patterns experienced in 2020, the PSPS events we saw between November and December and into mid-January was a very different experience than what we saw in 2019. All of this underscores the importance of having a more resilient grid that will significantly reduce the risk of utility equipment sparking large and catastrophic wildfires, and the need for PSPS as a measure of last resort. And so SE remains dedicated to keeping our community safe by making our infrastructure more resilient against the increasing threat of extreme conditions driven by climate change. And as we look ahead and preparing for 2021, we need to take into account the events of 2020, and we are working to make significant progress in reducing the risk of wildfires, as well as reducing the impact of PSPS. And so our wildfire mitigation plan and our PSPS action plans work together to achieve these priorities. Next slide, please. Now, this slide summarizes the key achievements in our wildfire mitigation plan, which we met or exceeded despite the challenges posed by COVID-19. To improve the overall resiliency of our infrastructure, we installed over 960 miles of insulated covered conductor and over 6,000 fire-resistant poles. Performed detailed inspections of our distribution and transmission infrastructure, assessed nearly 100,000 trees, and removed more than 12,200 that could fall into power lines and lead to ignitions. We also installed over 3,000 fast-acting fuses and 49 additional devices to better segment and isolate our system that will further support reducing PSPS. We're also bolstering our situational awareness through our network of 166 high-definition cameras that cover our high fire risk areas, and installed an additional 590 weather stations to now have over 1,000, monitoring real-time conditions to help us assess conditions in real time. Now, these actions are intended to continue increasing the resilience of our infrastructure that will also help us minimize service disruptions during fires, regardless of ignition source. This will also support improving fire agencies' ability to detect and respond to emerging fires, as well as continually improve the coordination between utilities, state, and local emergency management personnel. We want to thank California's leadership, lawmakers, and various agency personnel for addressing what is critically important to protect public safety. We are proud of our partnership with local and tribal governments, first responders, and the public who have come together to further reduce the risk of potentially devastating wildfires. And as we turn our attention to PSPS, we're building upon the work from our wildfire mitigation activities and adding to it additional criteria and requirements to directly address the frequency and impact of PSPS in our communities. Next slide, please. Now, we seriously take the concerns we heard from our about our PSPS execution, and we know we have to do better. On February 12th, we filed our action plan with the California Public Utilities Commission that addressed 5 main areas: to reduce the need for PSPS, improve our execution, minimize the impact of PSPS when events do occur, keeping our customers and partners informed, and enhancing our post-event after-action reports. I'll summarize these 5 areas and then hand it over to our other presenters who will cover these in more detail. So the first area addresses reducing the need for PSPS, which means accelerating our grid hardening, especially to help those areas, those locations where our customers have been impacted numerous times. Now, while PSPS has impacted about 20% of our infrastructure located in high fire areas, communities like Simi Valley and Moorpark have been impacted on numerous occasions. So in our plan, we are specifically focusing on those frequently impacted circuits that experienced 4 or more de-energizations since 2019, including January this year, with the goal of reducing the scope, frequency, and duration of PSPS events. Our work scope includes accelerating grid hardening work on 72 circuits by replacing our bare overhead wire with covered insulated conductor, reviewing our operations, and adding more automation to our distribution system. Now, while this doesn't mean that there won't be situations in which PSPS won't still be needed, the frequency and duration should significantly decrease, as you'll hear more about in the next few slides. The secondary focus is to improve our execution of PSPS events. One of the ways we expect to do that is providing better transparency into the decision-making process. This means providing more information through various channels, including our website, to provide a better understanding of our PSPS protocols and factors that go into the decision-making process. And we're also going to be making significant improvements to our PSPS notifications that you receive before, during, and after events. We understand the issues and frustrations surrounding how notifications of PSPS events are received, and that we need to do a better job of informing our customers about the status to better prepare you for when they occur. And for people who are on medical baseline, we will be ensuring that notifications are positively received in addition to our critical care customers. And when PSPS events do occur, we will be increasing our efforts to reduce the impact, especially on our most vulnerable customers. We will be working to increase enrollment in our medical baseline program and expand participation in other areas such as our critical care battery backup program and other incentives to support providing more backup solutions. We'll also be working with local and tribal governments to further look for ways to increase community resiliency by expanding the services that will enhance safety of the community overall. The fourth area of focus is to keep our partners and customers clearly and consistently informed. You can expect better ways to receive educational materials through including our website, for more information about PSPS. And for our partners, we will leverage technology to improve information sharing and coordination as we work together to plan and respond in a more comprehensive way. And lastly, we're working to enhance and improve our post-event reporting to make them more transparent and clear for our stakeholders. We learned a lot in our experiences so far, and these reports go a long way to continually improve our performance after every event. So in a nutshell, the outcomes we're expecting are to reduce the scope and frequency of PSPS, improve our coordination and engagement with our partners and critical infrastructure customers, expand our outreach and enrollments of vulnerable customers, and improve our post-event reports. So this gives you an idea of all the major elements in the plan that we filed. And now I'll hand it over to Terry to cover our efforts to accelerate grid hardening and to reduce the need for PSPS.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, and thank you all for joining us. I'm going to cover one of our focus areas, which is to reduce the need for PSPS. And to that end, we have been working on a concentrated effort to focus primarily on frequently impacted circuits. Eric mentioned this earlier. There are circuits that experienced 4 or more de-energization events associated with PSPS since 2019. The effort is targeted for the hardest hit communities, but I want to reinforce that the general grid hardening work that we are doing goes well beyond these hard hit circuits. So I don't want to imply that we're ignoring other customers that are not on the circuits that we're going to talk about today, or that other circuits are left behind, but I believe it's appropriate to focus this concerted effort on those that experience the most PSPS events. So we understand 2020 was a particularly difficult year. Our intent is to learn from these events so that we can significantly improve as we go forward. Our goal is to achieve reductions in the scope or the number of customers impacted, reductions in the frequency of the PSPS events, and reductions in the duration of an event should it occur. And we also need to complete this work in a time frame between now and October 1, because October is historically when we see the elevation of PSPS occurring, and typically that's October, November. Last year was a little unusual. We had quite a number of events in December and even on into January, but the goal here is to finish by October to be ready. So what we're shared today is where we're at this point. This expedited effort, what we also call expedited grid hardening, is what I'm going to primarily talk about. And we'll do this through a number of tools that we believe will improve the customer experience. So let's move to the next page, and I'll share a little bit about the tools that we're employing. They're shown in this table. Insulated wires is the first item here. We also refer to this as covered conductor, and it's an effort to replace our bare wire. Bare wire is open to the elements, so when debris comes in contact with the wires, it can cause a short circuit, much like what would happen if you created a short circuit in your in-home wiring, and anyone that's experienced that knows it can create quite a spark. That's no different than when a palm frond or a tree branch or other debris blows into our lines. It creates a short circuit and a spark. So covering our wire eliminates this unintentional contact from becoming an ignition, and really it allows it to harmlessly, the debris to harmlessly flow into and out of the lines, because the wire will have this insulation layer around it. And by insulating our wires, we are also able to raise our wind speed thresholds before we de-energize in a PSPS event. And in some cases, to a level where PSPS events become unlikely. I'm also going to note that insulating our wire has reliability benefits beyond PSPS. As you all know, wind occurs throughout the year, and this can result in de-energizations, not PSPS related. It's from accidental contact from other objects. It could be even things like mylar balloons. Anything that would make contact with our lines would cause the circuit to de-energize and interrupt your power. But with covered wires, the circuit can often remain energized even if these things were to occur. The second method listed here is what we call segmentation. This was an area that we focused on last year. We're building on that for 2021, and it involves installing remote controlled automated switches, and that allows us to de-energize very specific smaller areas. And the benefit to segmentation is that we can reduce the number of customers impacted by just de-energizing areas that we're very specifically concerned with. It can also reduce the duration for some customers as well. Next on the list here is new weather stations. It's another way we can reduce PSPS. This improves our situational awareness. It provides us constant wind, temperature, humidity, and other weather data, and gives us more precision about weather at specific locations. And when you couple it with the automated switches, it again gives us that ability to focus PSPS on a smaller area. The fourth method is enhanced switching protocols. Many of our circuits have an electrical connection to an adjacent circuit. So if an adjacent circuit is not impacted, or let's say it's already been hardened, then there may be opportunities to switch customers to the adjacent circuit. And it would have to be customers that are located in an area where we don't have a concern, but that does occur. And through the use of automated switches, we can decouple a portion of our customers that are not in a high wind area from their main circuit and switch them over to a nearby circuit. Now, it only works if the nearby circuit is also not affected by PSPS. But as we continue to harden our circuits, we get this community benefit effect where even if the circuit that you're on isn't necessarily being hardened and the adjacent one is, there are opportunities to, what we call it, roll load over to that adjacent circuit. And we also know from the past few years which circuits tend to be the most impacted. So we now know where these good opportunities to switch exists because of this historical experience. I have an example of this in a couple slides that I'll show you how this can actually work. The fifth item here is operational protocols for the use of PSPS. It's really where, based on recent changes in the environment, certain circuits or portion of circuits can be removed from PSPS consideration. An example might be a lack of vegetation in the area, so the fuels just aren't present to burn, and that can happen because of, let's say, for example, a recent fire. So a burn scar would eliminate the vegetation, but there are other reasons as well. Sometimes we have small portions of circuitry that traverses across parking lots, even if it's in a designated high fire area. And so we look very carefully at these opportunities to see if there's a way to avoid de-energizing certain customers. So with that, let's go to the next slide, and I'll just do a real high-level overview of this. These are the circuits in the area. I know this is impossible to read, but it's a map of the frequently impacted circuits in the area. There's 6 of them here, and I'll just start with this broad view. The black dotted areas are the communities, the left being Moorpark, the right being Simi Valley. There are additional circuits in these areas, but we don't show them because they weren't in our highly impacted criteria. So the key takeaway here is that we are doing something on all the frequently impacted circuits. And I mentioned this earlier, even if they're not in the frequently impacted circuit list, there is quite a bit of additional work that we're doing on other circuits as well. But really we have this targeted effort on those areas that were most impacted. I'll briefly explain the shading. The yellow shading is where we're doing general construction-related work. It's the expedited grid hardening portion where we're covering our bare wire or installing switches or weather stations. The green areas is where we have the operational protocols that I just talked about, where there might be an area that you're less concerned about, and let's say we no longer have concerns about fuel or vegetation under the wires, and we can get we can remove that portion of the circuit from consideration, from PSPS consideration. And the blue is where, in analyzing some of the past events we've had, we've identified opportunities to switch customers to adjacent circuits. Okay, with that, I want to, on the next slide, just address a question we typically get. Oftentimes it's one of two. Why do my neighbors across the street have power? Or why am I de-energized if I live in an underground area? And this illustration is meant to just depict how that could occur. And it really depends on where your particular home is fed from. And in this illustration, the homes on the left side of the street, it's meant to show that they're fed by an underground service, but it originates as an overhead line that traverses across that hilly area, which is we'll call it a designated high fire area. And so these homes would be subject to PSPS should those areas where we've got high fire concerns become subject to PSPS. Across the street is fed by another circuit that traverses off to the right here, and presumably not under any high fire concern. And so even during a PSPS event, they could remain energized. This isn't altogether common, but it does occur quite a bit. And in the example I'm going to show, some of that might become a little more apparent. So let's move to the next slide. There you go. So the actual example here, it demonstrates how we were working to reduce the need for PSPS. And this is an actual circuit. It's called the Twin Lakes circuit. It originates out of a substation called Santa Susana. It's shown as the green square at the far left. The circuitry is shown as orange and green lines that traverse horizontally just south of the 118 freeway, eventually towards the end of the circuit on the right, crossing over to the north, and then it actually comes back down to the south of the freeway at the far right where the circuit ends. The orange lines are overhead portions, and the green are underground. The legend's at the bottom of the map, just for your reference. So right out of the substation is almost all overhead circuitry, depicted by the orange color. And if the wind speeds at this location were to become a concern, then likely what we would do is open the circuit breaker at the substation itself. We wouldn't be able to employ automated switches along the circuitry to de-energize portions. We would end up opening the breaker, in this case, de-energize the entire circuit, including customers that are on the underground portions. Fortunately, as a result of a weather station we installed in this area, we know that this is not, this hasn't historically been an issue. If it were, then the green sections would be de-energized, sort of addressing the question that I just posed on the previous slide. So here's what the team did. So when the team looked at this circuit with a specific intent to reduce PSPS, one option was to install covered conductor on the orange overhead sections, and that would allow us to raise wind speed thresholds. The problem with this approach was that in the area that is marked, there's a number 2 off to the right there, and it's a little thicker orange line. This area of the circuitry, it's overhead, it actually crosses right over the 118 freeway. It's an area that experiences very high wind gusts, up to and even exceeding 70 miles an hour, and that occurred several times in 2020. There were 5 de-energization events on this circuit in 2020. 4 of them were at or near 70 miles an hour, at or exceeded. So installing covered conductor there really wouldn't help PSPS because they exceed even the thresholds that we would tolerate for, even with the covered conductor, it would exceed the thresholds. So the team scrapped that idea and continued to work on an alternative that ends up being more complicated, but achieves what we believe should be a significant reduction in the need for PSPS. So let me try to explain this. On the far right is some words there identified as number 1, and on the map it's labeled as a blue 1. And this would be a switching protocol that we would employ. And what we've discovered is that this portion of the circuitry off to the very far right has circuit ties to two different circuits. One on the top portion to the north and one on the bottom to the south. We would connect them to different circuits because there's actually a very small section of overhead. It's hidden by the blue circle that is a concern, and we would de-energize that portion and actually separate those two, and we would connect the bottom portion to one circuit, the top portion to another circuit. We would then, and this gets to the number 2 there, we would de-energize that entire orange section. And the reason why this is important is what I described earlier. It's the area that experiences the severest winds in this circuitry. The good thing here is that there are no customers along that portion. So we would first connect electrically the sections on the far right before we were to de-energize that portion identified as section 2. And what that means just simply is that customers wouldn't experience an interruption, even a momentary one, because we'd be connecting them electrically to the adjacent circuits before we decoupled them from the Twin Lakes circuit. The last thing we would do is there remains overhead portions, and they're identified as 3 on the map. And these are still areas of concern. This is a high fire area. We have overhead lines that could be a concern. But these portions happen to be in smaller residential areas, and what we would do is position live field observers. I mean, these are qualified electrical workers that know the terrain, know the circuitry, know the area, they work in this area, and we can do this because it's a smaller section, and the observers can generally have a line of sight on most of the overhead lines that are there. Now, if one of these workers saw conditions that worsen and they had concerns, they may inform us that we need to de-energize the circuit. So that still could happen, but that level of wind speed intensity didn't actually occur in 2020. So the conclusion here, and it's shown in the bottom right, if these mitigations are in place, and let's say had they been in place for 2020, there were 5 de-energization events in 2020. We believe that no customers would be impacted by PSPS. So all 5 events would be mitigated, would be eliminated in this scenario. And we can't predict the weather. We can't, guarantee that 2020 will look exactly like 2021. I'm not sure we'd want it to anyway, but what we've discovered here is that by performing this work, by doing it in this order, we think we can make a significant improvement to our customers in terms of the PSPS events. Let's go to the next slide and let's talk about some of the other circuits here. I just covered the Twin Lakes, but there are 5 other circuits in this area that were part of this heavily impacted group. The graph depicts the results of our circuit analysis and reviews, factoring in the mitigations developed thus far. The gray bar is what actually occurred in 2020, and it's shown in customer minutes. It's a metric that measures the amount of time that customers are de-energized. And it factors in both the number of customers on a circuit and the total time each customer experiences a de-energization. So the gray is what actually happened. If we employ the mitigations on these circuits, the overall community will see a 68% reduction in the customer outage time across all these circuits, applying this grid hardening work that we're doing. Let me just comment on one of the circuits. It's called the Energy, and it's right about in the middle there. You can see the gray bar is not very different from the orange bar, and what that tells us is that our first review of the Energy circuit didn't result in the level of benefits that we were expecting. So we have actually gone back and re-reviewed that circuit and gone further to see what else we can do. And I can tell you, I feel pretty comfortable saying that the re-review looks like that orange bar will drop by more than half. So, again, the effort here, the issue here is trying to do all we can do to reduce the impacts of PSPS and really use it as that measure of last resort. On the Twin Lakes, it's quite a bit of work that we're preparing. We're putting it into our playbooks, but the idea there is that we're going to go through those measures first before we get to PSPS. Okay, so the last slide I have here is just a discussion around some of our vegetation management programs. I'll just touch on that really quickly. As mentioned earlier, vegetation management is an important component of our wildfire mitigation plan. We now inspect about 1.4 million trees across our service area every year to determine if they could pose a hazard by making contact with our power lines. And in addition to that, tall trees, let's say up to 200 feet from our wires, will be assessed and may be pruned or removed if they demonstrate a high risk of falling into our lines. So we'll also continue to remove dead, dying, diseased trees in high fire risk areas. And lastly, we will be removing palm trees that may come in contact with our power lines and pose risks to public safety. So customers who have palm trees affected by this program will be contacted by SE representatives to discuss their options. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand it back over.
All right. Terry, thank you. This is Dave Kientz. I think this is my slide. So first of all, I want to start by thanking Simi Valley and Moorpark for joining us this evening. I know there are other options for your evening, and we truly do appreciate your time and the opportunity to have this discussion. Right now, it feels like a one-way discussion, but we're going to talk about how we can engage a little bit more and get your feedback. So my first slide, I'm going to talk about notifications, and I'm going to fall right on the sword here. Eric already alluded to it, but this is an area where we have a lot of room for improvement, and we have a team of folks who are already well into looking at improvements on how we can better communicate and provide notifications during these events. First of all, how can we be more clear and transparent? I'll give you an example. When we notify you of an imminent de-energization, you may interpret that as your power is going to go out in the next few minutes. On the SCE side, that may mean to us that your power may go out in the next hour or two, or perhaps 3. And so there's a disconnect in expectations as a result of that. So we're going to focus on getting better on how we are more transparent and in sync with the language we're using. We created a lot of confusion with notifications this past year. We sometimes, in some cases, over notified. Other cases, we under notified, and so that's a big focus area for us to understand the whole customer experience behind notifications to try to get it right. We introduced something called zip code notifications this past year, and they're really intended for non-SE customers to be able to sign up to get a notification of an outage in another zip code. So if you had a loved one, your parents live in an SCE service territory, and you want to know if their power has been impacted, you could sign up for the zip code alert to be notified. That was the intent. Unfortunately, we have customers that are signed up for a number of different alerts, and it's caused a great deal of confusion. We're going to fix that. We've already started down that path. The other planned improvement is we're currently looking, and we've heard loud and clear that some of our service territory is in areas where we have poor cell coverage. Our customers have poor cell coverage in the canyons, in the mountains and valleys. And so we are currently working with our County Office of Emergency Management to see if we can partner with them to provide notifications through their emergency radio broadcasts. So more to come on that. On notifications, there's several ways that we have enabled our customers to become aware and for us to notify them. We've listed those on the right: text alerts, voice alerts, email alerts. One that's not listed here, we partnered with the Nextdoor app, for those of you who are familiar with it, and so you can get an alert through the Nextdoor app. So that has been in place for a while now. The most important bullet on this slide is the next one, and that is, please, if you are interested in receiving alerts, please ensure you are signed up. You have to take that, make that effort to go personally sign up for your address level outage notifications. So there's going to be information at the back of this presentation that will help guide you to the location where you can go. Also, if you were looking for an alternative to find out more information about an outage, you could go to our SE website, our PSPS page, to get a visual map and outage information. And that information will also be at the back of the slide. Let's go to the next slide, if you would. So this next slide is about customer care, and this is an area where I happen to spend most of my time during the working day, and we have developed several programs that we've implemented to help our customers become more resilient and prepared for an outage. The first one on the upper left is what we refer to as our critical care battery backup program. And this is targeting our most vulnerable customers, those customers that have a dependency on medical equipment, life-sustaining medical equipment. And we implemented a program last year to install for a targeted segment of customers a fully subsidized battery, a Gold Zero Yeti battery sized to their medical equipment to power their equipment during an outage. It's a great program. We are making good headway in getting all of those installed. I want to bring awareness tonight to that program with you all, because if you do qualify for this and you have any hesitation or you haven't been contacted, I encourage you to look into this one. You have to live in a high fire risk area, which for the most part you all do. You need to be on our medical baseline rate or signed up for medical baseline, and income qualified. So that means you're enrolled in our CareFera program. We are making some enhancements. In fact, we've implemented enhancements to this program last month. We're dropping the critical care aspect of this, so now many more customers will become eligible for this program. You'll have to be medical baseline CareFera in a high fire risk area. So again, this is the most important program on this slide. I encourage you all, if you have a need, please look into this. A couple other programs we've launched, and again, it's focused on encouraging investment in resiliency. We have a $50 portable power station rebate available to all customers. And we have also identified a segment of customers who were dependent or are dependent on pumping water. They need electricity to pump water in their home or small business. And we launched a portable generator rebate from $300 to $500 to help customers invest in resiliency to power, enable power to move water in their home. I will share with you that we are enhancing both of those programs in the coming months. Hopefully by the June timeframe, we're going to enhance those programs to hopefully make them a little more broadly available. And I won't share any more. I'll get ahead of myself. The last bullet is our self-generation incentive program, also called SGIP. And it's a statewide program for a whole home battery. And for customers who are in high fire risk areas, also in DAX designated communities, the incentives have been increased to help cover the majority of the cost of this whole home battery and install. So for those of you who are familiar, like a Tesla Powerwall, those are the types of whole home batteries that are part of this program. If you qualify, it's a super way to provide resiliency in your home. These are large batteries that can literally power the whole home. So let me keep moving here. During an outage, when we do call a PSPS event, we deploy resources to help mitigate the impact of the outage. These are referred to as community crew vehicles and community resource centers. Many of you on the call may be familiar with our yellow vans and trucks that we deploy with skilled and trained SCE resources. Typically there from 8 a.m. in the morning till 10 at night, handing out what we refer to as resiliency kits, water, snacks, USB solar chargers. We've even, depending on the community, handed out firewood, we hand out bulk water, etc. So we're there to help mitigate the impact. One important thing is we hand out ice vouchers or bulk ice. The purpose of that is for you to take that home, put it in your refrigerator or your freezer actually. And by doing so, you can help to prevent food spoilage for up to 12 hours. And I say up to because if your refrigerator is not full, the duration will be less than that. So we're providing ice vouchers for you to go buy some ice and put it in the fridge to prevent food spoilage. We also have our hotel discounts, and we do have one at the Courtyard Marriott in Simi that we have contracted with. They'll provide a 15% discount on hotels that are as a result of a PSPS event. Let's see, community resiliency. We have a couple of pilots that we've deployed. The resiliency zones don't really impact Simi Valley and Moorpark. They are more in rural communities to provide backup power for essential services. On the other hand, we do have some microgrid projects, one targeted in Simi Valley. That's great news. We're looking at powering a small community. I think we've targeted about 200 customers. Again, in Simi Valley, it is scheduled to go live by 2022, so next year. More news to come on that, but that's great news to pilot that opportunity. Let's see if I forgot anything on this slide. I think I covered it all. Let's keep moving here. Next slide, please. So this is our engaging communities slide, and tonight is a great example of what we mean by engaging communities, right? We're having this live stream event to help share information, and I mentioned to get feedback back from you. That's important for us because we need to hear from you in order to improve what we're doing. You're going to have a couple of opportunities to provide that feedback in the Q&A, and also there'll be a survey at the end of our live stream. So please, I want to encourage you to provide that feedback. So we're using all kinds of different media channels to communicate through: digital, social, radio. We have a lot of meetings scheduled, and we're more than happy to come back to Simi and Moorpark in the future. We can downsize it to smaller communities, but we are here to communicate and to help answer questions. So please take us up on that. I think it was Terry or Eric mentioned our vulnerable customers, and we really emphasize ensuring their safety. When we have an event, we notify those customers through their preferred channel, whether it's phone or voice, text, or email. We actually look for a positive confirmation back from that vulnerable customer. If we get it, great. We know that they've received our communication. If we do not, we will send a field representative to their home to ensure they have received notification and that they are safe and have an emergency plan on how to take care of themselves. So that is the the meat of this slide. We want to continue the communication and again, encourage feedback. This last slide that I have is really the call to action slide. There is a wealth of information available on sce.com, and I want to encourage you to go there to check it out. Rudy has a slide in the back of this deck that we'll share with you that has all of the URLs on the website where you can find resources. It's really important, and that is our ask of you, to become familiar with all of the different programs and sources of information that we have put together for you. We've worked hard to put a large amount of information that's meaningful. The middle one, sign up, I've already said it, but please sign up for alerts so you can stay aware and stay on top of the events that are occurring. I highly encourage you all to look into the programs that are available. Medical baseline program can help reduce your overall electric cost every month. It's an increase in your tier 1 base. So the longer you stay in tier 1, the lower your costs are for electricity. Our CareFera programs for income qualified customers, those are, I'll use the term gates to qualify you for some of these other programs that are very meaningful. So I want to encourage you all to get familiar with these programs. And then lastly, we have a lot of information on the website about being prepared, how to prepare for emergencies. We've all heard this, not just from SCE, but through your local government agencies. We all should have a emergency preparedness plan in place. We need to have supplies available, whether it's water, food, flashlights, batteries, and you can find a lot of this information on sce.com. So thank you for listening to me. I know I've provided a lot of information, but yeah, please do get familiar with this. And with that, Rudy, I think I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Dave. We're now going to open up the forum to our Q&A, both questions that we received when folks registered and also questions that we received through the chat box, and we thank you for submitting those questions through the chat box. We're going to try to be efficient in our responses and try to get to as many questions as we can in the allotted time. So let's start with a couple of questions that are familiar themes at most of our community meetings. Are you going to underground your lines to prevent PSPS? And I'm going to go ahead and turn that over to Eric for a response.
Thanks, Rudy, and I appreciate the question. So maybe along the lines of some of the things that Terry had covered. So we do consider a range of options when it comes to grid hardening that includes undergrounding, automation, insulated wires, and overhead systems. Now, underground system designs and construction is a lot more intensive than an overhead system, and will often not be cost effective or practically feasible when we look at rough terrains and issues that we run into in those kinds of an environment. So overall, it would take a lot longer and much higher cost if we were to do this everywhere. So we really need to be sort of specific about what the right solution is at the right location. And that's why a lot of what you heard today is about automation, taking customers and locating them to places where the risk is not as significant, or insulating, replacing our bare wires with insulated wires. So I do want to kind of clarify something. When we talk about covered conductor, we're not actually covering the existing wire. We're removing the bare wire and replacing it with the wire that has insulation. So just to clarify that. So I think at the bottom line here, what we're really trying to do is get as much deployed as quick as we can to make the most difference in the shortest amount of time.
Thank you, Eric. Our next question is related to reimbursements for customers impacted by public safety power shutoffs, and I think I'll turn that over to Dave for a response.
Yeah, thank you, Rudy. This one comes up frequently. So during a PSPS event, when we do de-energize, there are certain circumstances where we will approve a reimbursement for a loss. Let's just take food spoilage. If there is negligence on the side of SCE, then that would be a basis for approving a claim for reimbursement. So negligence is a key piece of this. Because we can't control the weather, we typically, unless there is negligence, will not approve a claim. But each claim is reviewed individually, and it's given thorough review. Customers are also able to appeal. It's an area we're continuing to work on as well to provide a little more clarity and set expectations on. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Dave. So here's another question that seems to come up quite a bit in our community meetings. When PSPS is over, we get notice that Edison is inspecting areas before restoring power, but it takes an additional 6 to 7 hours without any additional notification to let us know what is happening. I think I'm going to turn that over to Eric for a response.
Yeah, so just maybe it may be worthwhile to go over the process of what happens when we do restoration and how this aligns with the notifications that Dave was talking about. So during a PSPS event, what we try to do is to forecast when the wind speeds and the conditions that cause a PSPS event to occur begin to subside. So we call that end of an event towards what we call a period of concern, the period at which the event is expected to last. So if we're reaching that end of that period and we have confirmation that the wind speeds are going down, what we will do is we will initiate patrol of our lines, which is important because in order for us to safely re-energize our system, we want to make sure that our folks that are out in the field are doing a thorough inspection to make sure that our system is safe to re-energize. So anything that might have happened during the wind event is identified and is remediated before we actually turn the power on. So when we initiate the patrols, we will send out a notification that that has begun. And then when power is restored, we will also send another notification. Typically, the time to actual do restoration will vary depending on the size of the event and the amount of infrastructure that has to be patrolled. So the more hardening work that we do, the more segmentation and isolation that we do, the faster we can restore power, and hopefully that'll help over time.
Thank you, Eric. Another question. When the power was shut off, we also lost our Verizon cell towers in Wood Ranch, which is in the Simi Valley area. We had no outside communications for 24 hours. What can you do to make sure the cell towers have power in the future? And I think Eric's probably best to respond to this one.
Yeah, so it is a challenge, and we recognize that when power goes out, it also affects communications, which is really difficult to figure out what to do when that happens. So we are in the process of engaging the telecom providers and sharing the experiences that we have in PSPS, so we can help them build a more of a resiliency plan for their facilities. Now the goal is to have a conversation of what telecom providers can do to improve resiliency, and what we would like to see is for telecom infrastructure to become more resilient to power outages. So we're holding workshops with providers to engage in these discussions.
Thanks, Eric. We also had an inquiry from an attendee who asked, what if there are trees near lines? What number can we call to report that? And I'll turn that over to Terry.
I don't have the number to call. I don't know if David or one of the customer service folks.
Yeah, so you can probably use the same number to report an electrical emergency, which is 1-800-611-1911. and those are the same number that you would call to report a power outage. For any of these situations where you see trees being dangerously close to a power line, we want to know about it. We'll send a qualified worker out to inspect, and we will ensure that there's adequate clearance between the lines and our facilities. Another question that came up is why does Edison do work in the dark? It creates sensitive situations, particularly for seniors who may be on oxygen and who prefer not to be up at night without lights. And I'm going to turn this over to Terry, and I think it has a little bit to do with some of the restrictions that we're facing with some of the communities we're served in regards to working during the day because of folks who are going to school during the day at home and working from home, COVID related. So Terry?
Yeah, thank you, Rudy. Good question. And it's definitely a difficult time for us to be taking these outages to perform the work. We often hear from teleworkers and distance learners, don't turn my power off during the day. And we also hear from community leaders as well, asking if we can perform some of the work in the overnight hours when people aren't, attending school or working. But the other side of that, we do hear from seniors and others saying that, this really isn't a good time for me. And so we're trying to strike the best balance we can. We do listen to people when they call and say, hey, this is difficult for me, and what can we do? And we try to solve that as best we can. But it is part of that dilemma we face right now with COVID, because there are so many people at home and working, and many of them prefer the overnight or the evening outages. But we'll do our best to try to meet the needs of all the people on a circuit. It's just sometimes it's impossible to satisfy everyone.
Thank you, Terry. And then we had an inquiry from a customer that wanted to know how do they determine, or how do they learn what circuit they're served from? And I think Dave can probably address this one.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if the circuit will come up on our website. You can enter your address on an outage page, but I don't know that the circuit will pop up. I'm going to have to either ask any of our other presenters if they know, or we can get back with the correct answer.
Thanks, Dave.
You're
Next
welcome.
question. When power is shut off, we need better estimates on when it will be restored. Simply posting the end date of the outage window, which can be several days out, is not helpful, and you should have an idea based on your extensive weather models. And I think it's PSPS related. I'm going to turn that over to Eric.
Yeah, so recognize that there is opportunity for improvement when it comes to our estimated restoration times. So one of the things that we're going to be doing is, well, two things. One is we are looking at the whole series and chain of events that occur in notifications to figure out what ways that we could better streamline and clarify some of the messages that we deliver. The second piece of that is really about developing better ways to estimate the restoration time. And one of the things that we're doing is we're improving the accuracy of our weather forecasting. So one of the parts of our action plan that I didn't speak about is that we are investing into the next generation of weather tools to get even further granularity into that forecast. Because at the end of the day, what drives the restoration time and the start of these patrols is when we expect the weather to subside, and a confirmation of that. So the closer we can align those two, I think the better estimates we're going to have.
Thank you, Eric. And I'm just scrolling through the questions. Can you provide details on the self-generation incentive program or a website for more information, Dave?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the best place I can send you is our se.com /PSPS webpage. On the bottom right of that webpage is a resources tab, and that'll take you right to the self-generation incentive program. It's a complex program. I'll start with that, but we can get you the information you need. We can put you in contact with a live program support person who could help you understand if you qualify and at what level you might qualify. Typically, self-generation incentive program is managed through approved contractors to help you with the installation and the whole procurement process. So start with the website, and then we can get a live body to help you to understand your qualification eligibility.
Thanks, Dave. The question that got several likes is, why haven't you been replacing your lines on an ongoing basis? Now all of a sudden you're doing this. You should have been doing this already, or at least part of it. And I'm going to turn that over to Terry for a response.
Yeah, I mean, so part of the challenge here is, and Eric touched upon this early in the presentation, there's been a number of things that have been occurring here. 5 of the 6 biggest wildfires have occurred, just in 2020 alone. So I'm not a climatologist or a fire scientist, but things are changing in the environment, and wildfires, when they do occur, are resulting in more devastation. So the question as to why we haven't been doing it earlier, ignitions didn't result in this kind of catastrophic outcomes. So that's one. The other is that there's an inherent cost to adding, additional cover. So when the situation didn't present itself to be problematic the way it was, prior to this period, then it may not have been, made economic sense to do it that way. But today, when there is an ignition, when there is a spark and the resulting ignition, the result seems to just be far more catastrophic. And so we are embarking on this. And I will also say that the additional benefits, the reliability benefits I mentioned before, that even outside of PSPS events, the wind can blow and it can provide some reliability benefits there as well.
Thank you, Terry. This next question had several likes. May be difficult to address in this forum, but we'd be happy to get together with you to discuss more specific details. The question is, can you share with us the actual locations of the above ground power lines that cause communities with underground lines to experience PSPS events? Since we experienced so many PSPS events in November, December, and January of this year, have you prioritized when we will have our conductors covered? And when will we see improvement to sectionalizing devices so fewer residents are impacted? And do you have a timeline? And if so, would it be beneficial to share with your customers? And I think that's probably an Eric question.
Actually, I think this is right in line, Terry, with something that this may have to do with what we can show as far as details on maps and things like that. There's probably some limited information we can show, but any thoughts around that?
Was that for Terry, the question?
Yeah, it's just around, how much information. I think.
Oh, sorry. I mean, the information exists. I think we'd have to get back to people and think about how we, might provide that information. There was a lot in that question as well about, our priority and our work plan, and we talked earlier about prioritizing the communities that are most impacted, and to make a difference for this upcoming season. So we do think, I think there was another question around the Big Rock. The Big Rock really had consequential impacts in 2020. It was pretty bad, and the improvement is significant. And so the reason why we prioritize the Big Rock is for that very reason. There was a significant impact in 2020. And the intent here is to be ready by October, because as you correctly state, October, November, December, and even January, I mean, these are when the biggest events occurred last year. So the idea here is for these frequently impacted circuits to be ready by October. There's really two things to consider. I mean, one is ignition risk, but the other, which is what we're focusing on, is this expedited work. Our charter really is to reduce the use of PSPS. So if we can accelerate some work and thereby reduce PSPS, that's what we're chartered to do. So our goal is to finish by then. But in terms of the circuitry and the underground and overhead portions, I think we'd have to look at that.
Yeah, we've actually conducted a meeting that identifies the overhead and underground impacted areas with some of our communities, and I think the plan is, as we move forward, is to identify those areas and meet with the city staff so that they have a better understanding as to why certain areas are being impacted. Next question, I live at the east end of Simi. I'm concerned about my power going out during the summer for several days at a time. I can't afford to buy a whole house generator. How can I plan for this? Dave, you have any ideas on the customer care side?
Yeah, so if you qualify for the portable generator, that is one avenue to provide some resiliency. When you talk about cooling a home, air conditioning draws a lot of energy, so you have to size that generator appropriately to be able to power your air conditioning and keep your home cool during the summer. So it's very, very important to know sizing, but if you qualify, again, $300 to $500 in rebates are available. We have a website, it's called SCE.com Marketplace, where these rebates are available. I believe it's on that resource page, Rudy, that we have at the end of the presentation. Great place to go to look for that incentive.
And just a reminder, this entire presentation will be linked to our SCE.com website, and we'll provide the website for you in just a little bit. Dave, I think this one's probably up your alley as well. Can I get reimbursed for loss of work due to PSPS? I've been working from home due to COVID, and during the PSPS, my home Wi-Fi also went down, so I had to take time off from work. How do I get reimbursed for that?
Yeah, that's another good one, and especially in this COVID environment we're in. So unless there is somehow neglect on SCE's part, the likelihood of being reimbursed is very low. I'm not aware of any case where we've reimbursed for work or wage loss. But I will follow that by saying, if it's just a matter of powering your modem and router so you have internet access at home, a small portable battery, literally a couple $100 investment, will allow you to keep that modem and router up so you can stay connected, so you have your internet access. It'll also charge your laptop and your cell phone as well. So again, being aware of those programs is an area that we need to improve on. That portable power station rebate is available on SCE Marketplace.
Thanks, Dave. Another question, you stated in the last CPUC meeting that wind speed criteria from the National Weather Service is used for PSPS and is supposed to be a last resort, but in East Simi, the Big Rock Circuit specifically, this speed is normal from October through March, and the speed they're referring to is 25 and 31. So why can't the criteria be higher, like 50 miles per hour? Shouldn't last resort be reserved for those extreme events like 75 to 100 mile an hour winds that are much more rare? And I'm going to assume Eric can handle this one.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. I appreciate the question. So one of the reasons why the National Weather Service wind advisory level is used, which is 31 mile an hour sustained and 46 mile an hour gusts, is because it's sort of recognized as a value in which debris can become airborne. And one of the leading causes of outages and even ignitions on utility systems is contact with foreign object. So that's one of the reasons why technologies like insulated wire become important, because by replacing our bare wire with insulated wire, it allows us to raise wind thresholds to those levels that you were mentioning, closer to the high wind warning levels where property damage can actually occur. So hopefully that helps. The National Weather Service Wind Advisory level is really focused on debris flying.
Thanks, Eric. And Dave, this one's for you, and this is maybe reconfirming the information you provided earlier. Can you tell more about the rebate for home batteries if someone lives in a high-risk area? Are there any income limitations in order to qualify? Where do I go to see if I can qualify?
So I have a good answer to that one, and that is every SCE customer qualifies for a $50 rebate on a portable power station. There are no, today there are no restrictions on whether you live in a high fire risk area or what your income level is. All 5 million plus customers qualify for that $50 rebate. You can find that on SCE.com Marketplace under portable power stations.
Thanks, Dave. And Terry, I'm going to have you answer this one. Question was why the use of covering lines when they really mean replacing them, stating that this is double talk and confusing. Can you just clarify what we mean by cover conductor and that we're not actually covering the existing lines that are up there, we're actually replacing them?
Yeah, and you know, it's a term we use internally. We're actually trying to move over to insulated wire instead, but agree that it sounds confusing, and as Eric clarified earlier, it is in fact replacing our bare wire with wire that has an insulation around it. So it's a lesson for the future community meetings that we do, and we'll avoid using that term because obviously it did create some confusion.
Thanks, Jerry. And another question for you probably is, what is the lifetime for insulated wires?
Oh, but I don't know. I mean, typically, you know, wire can last 30, 40 plus years. So I would assume it would be similar to that. I don't know, Eric, if you know.
Yeah, I think that's about right, Terry.
Okay, and then we had another question regarding community resource centers. Dave, this is for you. I did not see many community service resources on the Simi PSPS map. I think there were 2. What data is used to determine the quantity of CRCs and the location?
That's a great question. So for every activation, we look at the circuits, we look at the communities impacted, and then we determine where we have resources. The community resource centers are brick and mortar locations. They're stores or community centers, could be a hotel. And so if we have one in the general area of impact, we will deploy, we'll activate that community resource center and deploy our resources to that location. We've used a number of sites in Simi and Moorpark. I'm intimately aware of those because I think I was activated for most of those events supporting those sites. If we do not have a community resource center, a brick and mortar site, we will deploy our community crew vehicle, which is one of our 8 mobile vans or trucks, and then we can locate that anywhere with permission from the local community. And again, we provide the same level of services, it's just in an outdoor environment.
Thank you, Dave. And Dave, I think this one's probably geared for a response from you as well. If you do not have solar, can you still get a Powerwall battery? Yes,
you can. So the SGIP program does not have a dependency on solar, rooftop solar. I will share though that the combination of both technologies will greatly increase your resiliency at home. You want to use your solar, if you have it, to charge that battery, and then use the battery when you can for either an outage or other time. If you're only dependent on, if you only have the battery and no solar, then you typically use that battery in an emergency or outage situation. You're charging it through the grid instead of through your solar panel.
Thank you, Dave. And I'm going to refer this one to Eric, have you use your crystal ball. Will there be the same PSPS activations in the fall of 2021 as was in 2020? I'm asking so I can decide if I should spend on a generator. I live in a high-risk area. Will PSPS be less likely in the fall and winter of 2021 due to the work being done now? Please advise.
So a couple of perspectives on that. One is, yeah, it is really difficult to know what the weather is going to be like. I will say that what we've seen in 2020 was a lot different than what we've seen in previous years. One is the amount of SEN events that sort of clustered towards the end of the year, number one, and just the lack of precipitation and the overall condition of fuels. It was also a La Nina year, and that probably, you know, has a higher probability of being a drier year. So I think it kind of lived up to that. I think in terms of 2021, the only thing, you know, we don't do outlooks that look out that far. What we do is we try to look at least in the near term over the course of the next month or two, you know, what is it sort of looking like? And it looks like, unfortunately, we're in for, at least what our experts tell us, is a drier than normal spring. You know, I think we're still dealing with some of the impacts. We did get the luxury of a little bit of precipitation that we had in two different, you know, more events, you know, after January. So that certainly helped with the fuel conditions as we know them right now. But as I said, as our experts look out, spring looks a little bit drier. But again, really hard to say exactly what the fire season is going to look like. And in terms of whether to purchase a generator, I mean, I think, and Dave, maybe you can have a perspective on this. I do think we feel that it's important for customers to have a resiliency plan. Depending on your particular needs, there may be certain things you want to invest in more than others. But I don't know, Dave, you probably get this question from time to time.
Yeah, I would add to that, Eric, thank you for the opportunity, is that if your circumstances at home include dependency on critical medical equipment, don't think of your need only during a PSPS event. That need exists in any emergency. And so for those situations, I highly recommend either a battery large enough to power your medical equipment or a fossil fuel generator. You know, we're trying to lower our carbon footprint. So you heard a little bit of hesitation with fossil fuel generation, but the reality is that's the most efficient technology today for these needs.
Thanks, Dave. Another question for Eric. What is the timeline for examining and hardening circuits that fell just short of the 4 outage criteria for expedited hardening?
So I think part of it, and maybe Terry, you have a perspective on this too, part of this is going to depend on our experience in 2021. And when we look at our experience in 2020, you know, because it was a very different year, there were circuits that got impacted more than we would have known if we only looked at 2019. So part of this is going to depend on the weather conditions and what happens in 2021. If we see certain circuits that really start to jump up in numbers, well, it's a matter of how we look at prioritization. But I think one of the things Terry did mention in the presentation is we're not only focusing on the circuits that have 4 or more, we're looking a lot more broader than that. So it could very well be that we're also working on circuits that, you know, are lower than that criteria. But one of the reasons why we're focusing on the 4 or more is because it's a matter of acceleration of certain types of work in a pretty short period of time and putting all of our resources into that. I don't know, Terry, did I miss anything?
Yeah, you covered it. I did, maybe just to put it in perspective, insulated wires on the 72 frequently impacted circuits, that represents about 780 miles of circuit miles of insulated wires we'll be installing. For the circuits beyond this, so 3 or more, let's say, and 2 or more, there's another 700 miles being installed. So there's a pretty significant amount of grid hardening work going on beyond these circuits. And let me also say, that Eric and I have discussed the fact that we should look just beyond as well. And we will look at some of those circuits that were impacted 3 or more times, particularly, our criteria was from 2019 through 2021. But, in particular, we wanted to look at, let's say, if there were 3 impacts in 2020 and none in 2019 or 21, that would be another area that we would look at. So, this is our initial effort to try to ensure that we can make the biggest impact in a short amount of time. But we aren't ignoring the other circuits, and we are actually going to put a little effort into some of those just beyond as well.
Thanks, Jerry. We also had a question with a couple of likes that asked what circuits are for what area. A map would be helpful on the expected improvement slide. And not sure who should address that one. How would a customer, again, learn what their circuit they're on, and then also what that service area is for that circuit? I know that folks can go to the sce.com/maps to learn of all the circuits that could possibly be impacted by PSPS events, but and I guess they can go to the website and input their address as well and learn what circuit they're on, and then go to the maps page. I think that would probably be the best way. Any other input from the others?
So Rudy, I'll give that a try. And I did receive some feedback that circuit level information is not available on our maps today for public consumption. I think if we have a specific area that we want to respond and provide circuit level mapping to, we could do that as a one-off perhaps and follow up. That's an option. I'm sure we could put together a map that would show circuits. It's just not available for a customer to go to the website to look it up today.
Thanks, Dave. And this one may be difficult to answer, but we had a question about what is the average age of the Simi power grid?
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy, I don't know the what power grid?
The Simi power grid. I guess all the circuits that serve the community of Simi Valley.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we can assume that the infrastructure was in place before the community was developed. So as old as the community is, our facilities are likely at least that old, if not older.
I think it's a hard question to answer because we also do replacement, in the life cycle of equipment too. So, we have a pretty active infrastructure replacement program. So I think it's, we have maybe some statistics around the average age of the utility system as a whole and by equipment, but yeah, I'm not sure what it would be specifically for Simi Valley.
Okay. And I don't see any questions that on new topics. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up the evening. Again, I want to thank everyone for your participation this evening. As mentioned earlier, everyone who registered for this event will be receiving a survey to provide us feedback. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, this meeting has been recorded. We will post the recording on our website in a few days at sce.com/wildfire, as well as other information and resources. Thank you all again for participating this evening. We appreciate your interest, and we wish you and your family good health. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.